It's round 10 of the US Championships. Fabiano Caruana is in the lead. He is 1 point ahead of the field and he is playing against one of the main rivals, Abimanyu Mishra, 14-year-old prodigy, super talent, rated over 2600 already and capable of causing an upset. He is 1 point behind. He needs to play for a win with the black pieces. So let's see what is happening in this direct encounter between the two favorites for the for tournament victory and become the new US champion. Let's have a look. Fabi starts with the move 1e4, c5, knight f3, d6. And here's a choice between playing aggressively with the open Sicilian or the more modest continuation. And Fabi, being 1 point ahead, he goes for the solid move bishop b5. And with solid, I mean, it's not like a draw offer. You're just trying to get a game, avoiding a theoretical battle. And after bishop d7, c4, white is not minding the doubling of pawns on b5 in case black would capture that bishop. Knight f6, knight c3, g6. Now white decides to exchange the bishops anyway. And we do get a very typical structure for these sort of, I would call them Maroczy bind type of pawn structures. After c takes d4, in a lot of cases, white is actually recapturing with a knight. But now after queen takes d4, white has some different idea in mind, and this is probably part of Fabi's home preparation. The idea is that after knight c6, the queen drops back to d3, and this is the sort of game Fabi had been looking for entering this round. He is saying, okay, maybe I'm not much better, but I do have a little nice extra space for my pieces thanks to the pawns on c4 and e4. And after castling kingside bishop d2, the rooks are connected with each other. So that's also very nice. And after a6, his idea was to put the rook on b1. And now this may come as a small surprise. You may think, what is this rook doing on b1? Well, it's getting out of this diagonal, so there are never any sort of tactical ideas. Secondly, you have ideas of placing the pawn on b3. Sometimes you can play it even more aggressively by bringing the pawn to b4. But white is very solid. And basically what white is doing is saying, okay, I'm fine. I have my pawns on e4 and c4. I'm anticipating any sort of pawn break by black. So it will be difficult for black to get in moves like b5 or e6, d5. It's not that simple. White is very well placed for that. So I think, even though it's not much, Fabi was relatively happy with the sort of game he got here. Knight g4 was played, opening up the diagonal for the bishop. Sometimes the knight comes to e5, so white drops back with the queen to e2, so that when a knight comes to e5, at least the knight doesn't hit the queen with tempo. That explains white's last move. And here I think black has various reasonable options, including continuing the plan here with knight ge5. That seems quite reasonable. Other move could be something like e6. I don't think much is happening at this stage. But the move rook fc8 was played. And frankly, I'm not sure this is the best way of proceeding here, as white comes in with the knight to d5, threatening a huge fork on b6, attacking both the rooks and the queen. So Mishra's idea was now to drop back with the queen to d8 to prevent the knight from coming to b6. And now white's plan is here to go bishop c3. And I think this is a very interesting moment. So let's have a look what Fabi is intending to do here. Now, he wants to exchange dark squared bishops and get rid of black's main defender of black's king. And frankly, I think if you go for a move like e6, black can just allow white to take on g7 and you recapture with the king. There's a position in which all the bishops come off the board. Both sides have two knights. I don't think much is going on, frankly. And I think Mishra, he lacked some experience. He's only 14-year-old. You cannot blame a 14-year-old not understanding every type of position. And what happened now is he decided to take on c3. And I guess that he had been anticipating white recapturing with the knight, so keeping the pawn structure intact. But Fabi's plan was now to recapture with the b pawn, so voluntarily weakening its pawn structure, getting isolated double pawns on the c file. They are potentially very weak, but we also see that the pawn on b7 is now under threat. It's hit by the rook on b1, and white is also renewing the threat of knight b6, setting up this knight fork once again. So it's a very concrete way of playing. Rook ab8 was played, and here I think white is having a great choice. He can already play the move knight b6, attacking the rook. If the rook goes to c7, you can go back to d5, and at least you have a repetition of moves. And considering the tournament situation, that is not bad news for white at all. But here, Fabi realized, well, why should I go for a repetition if I can play for much more? He played here the amazing pawn sacrifice, pawn to c5, and I think a lot of people, including me, I didn't understand the exact concept yet. But the point is that if you take the pawn on c5, then knight will come to b6. Rook has to go to c7. It's rook fd1. You're attacking the queen. The queen goes away. And here, it seems like black has parried all the immediate threats. But after something like e5, white's pieces are dominating the middle of the board, controlling the only open file. There are plans to go maybe queen e4, maybe h3, maybe g4. The knight is badly placed. Black's pieces are not looking great, especially this rook on c7. It's not able to move at all. So white has a huge advantage in this case. So that explains the pawn sacrifice. And now black was not really inclined taking that pawn on c5. Instead, Mishra went for the move knight ce5. So one pair of knights gets swapped. Then now the knight on f3 is no longer there. White is able to advance its pawn to f4, hitting the knight on e5. Knight goes back to d7. So now 3 pieces are attacking the pawn on c5. So the idea is to take on d6. And after e takes d6, well, the position comes down a bit. Obviously, this pawn on d6 is a weakness, but you're not really able to attack it at this point. The most important feature of this position is white's beautiful knight on d5, which cannot be chased away by a black pawn. It's also defending the pawn on c3, but you need to continue in an energetic way. And the move played in the game is the move f5. This is a great move. I will show you why this is so important. Because if you would go for the move rook b2 d1, improving your rook, then black can still challenge that knight with the move knight f6. And if knights can come off the board, then black breaks free and has possibilities to attack the pawn on c3 as well. But with the move f5, knight f6 is not really a possibility because it runs into f takes g6. And now the knight on f6 is under threat. And if you take the knight yourself, you can first take one of these pawns with check, and white opens up the kingside. So that's very bad news for black, and therefore black went for the move queen g5, trying to get the queen into play. But now the rook comes to f4, and this is another big move by Fabi, as here again the move knight f6, intending to get rid of this powerful piece. It's not so good, because white can follow up here with the move h4. And here you're attacking the queen, and the black queen cannot keep the knight supported. If the queen goes away, the knight on f6 will be captured with check. So knight f6 is not possible. But what really impressed me about Fabi's play at this stage is that he consciously, with his move f5 and rook f4, he has given up the control over the e5 square. So the knight comes into e5, and in a lot of Sicilians, this e5 square is very important to hold the position together. Look at this knight. It's supporting black's position in various directions. Later on, it may even go to the other side of the board. But first, okay, rook bf1. White is playing for a kingside attack right now. Rook c5 played, and here queen e3. So here you're just consolidating your position, protecting your pawn on c3. But there's also another idea, and that's after rook f8, which was played in the game. The queen comes over to h3. That's another big move, because if black is going to play a random move now, the point is white is about to take on g6, and there's no convenient way of recapturing. If you do take with the queen, there's knight e7. You're winning the queen thanks to a knight fork. That's really bad. You can't take with the f-pawn because the rook on f8 is hanging. And if you take back with the h-pawn, is knight f6 check. And after king g7, it's queen h7 with checkmate. So this is white's idea. He's intending to take on g6, knight f6, queen h7 with checkmate. Therefore, black finds himself in a very unpleasant position and decided even to give up the exchange by eliminating that knight on d5. But in such a position, with an extra exchange and the better pieces, white should be technically winning, of course. Rook e8 played, f takes g6. Now, here again, black is for a choice. If you do recapture with the h-pawn, it's rook h4, threatening to enter on h8, and white's major pieces are simply too strong. Therefore, f takes g6 was played. The f-file is open, but okay, at this point, black is still guarding the entry square, so white needs to change its strategy, centralize the queen again. Queen d8, h3 was played, so that the king gets some luft, so there are never any back rank issues. King g7, queen d4, pinning that knight on e5, rook e7, and okay, white is completely winning. Every move should be really good, but how should you eventually break through? Well, one plan would be here to advance the pawn to c5, trying to get rid of that pawn on d6, which is holding that knight on e5. In the game, Fabi went for rook f6, which is also okay, and after rook to d7, he went for the move queen f4, rook c7 played. And, well, white is looking for a way to break through. And I think the right plan here would be to advance the pawn to h4, intending to go h5, maybe to go h6. And hopefully you're able to infiltrate on f8 later on. I think that's a good plan. Instead, Fabi played here the move queen b4, which is not a great move because, well, you're attacking the pawn on d6 twice, but he completely missed that black can play here the move knight c4. And I mean, black is still in trouble, but look, this knight is holding the position together, and this queen on b4 is no longer able to join the attack. It cannot even get back into play right now, because if you go queen b1, it's knight e2 with a knight fork. The knight on c4 is quite stable, getting the support from the rook. White went back with the rook to f2, queen g5 played, and now queen a4 on the board, looking for the opportunity to infiltrate on e8 and then mate on f8. So queen goes to e3, pinning the rook, guarding the e8 square, queen to d1. So white needs to make a lot of effort to let the queen come back into play, giving up the pawn on c3. Well, that itself, it's not such a big problem, probably. Rook f3 played, taking the queen. Queen d2. Now, of course, white should not be interested in trading of queens because that gives back the exchange for sure. So that's a bad idea. But you can give a check. And then the knight comes back to e5, rook d1, queen c2, rook f2. You see, white is making a lot of passive moves compared to the situation about 5 to 10 moves ago. Then white's pieces were much more active. Now, okay, black is not better. Black has at least a pawn for the exchange. Maybe he can offer the exchange of queens. The endgame should be winning for white. But instead, he went for the move queen e4, Mishra, which is understandable as well. But now, having reached the time control, Fabi started to play pretty well again. And he found this plan of advancing the pawn to a5. So black went for h5. a5 was played, and after queen e3, well, the rook is pinned again, but it's queen b2, g5. Not sure this is the best, but imagine black gets a number of moves here. He would like to advance the pawn to g4 and then to g3, pinning, attacking the pinned piece on f2. But here, Fabi's idea is revealed as he initiates the exchange of queens. That's very good technique, and black practically cannot really avoid it. White's also attacking the pawn on d6 as well as the rook on c7. So queen takes b6, a takes b6, attacking the rook. Rook goes to c5 to attack the pawn. It's well defended at the moment, but first we go rook f5, hitting the pawn on g5, king g6, rook df1. Great technique, because all white needs to do in positions with an extra exchange, having an extra rook, is trying to find a way for these rooks to enter. And that's what's happening now. Rook takes d5. Black is taking the pawn, but now the rook comes to f8, which is very nice. You're intending to go rook b8, winning the pawn on b7. If you go rook b5, it's rook f6 check. And after king g7, you take the pawn on d6. And here we see that now many files have been opened, and eventually this pawn on b7 will be lost probably. So in the game, Mishra desperately tried to launch some sort of counter-offensive with the move g4, rook g8 check, king h7, and now the rook goes to b8, and the pawn on b7 is lost. Rook b5, rook takes pawn with check, king g7, pawn takes pawn, black recaptures, rook b8, and white now has a new asset as he is about to promote its b pawn. King g7, king h2, avoiding any back rank issues. In case of a check, you can always come up the board. Rook b3, rook c1, rook c1, king f6 played, rook c7. Second rook is coming over, so you're about to go for the move b7, move the rook from b8 and then promote the b pawn. Knight g6, b7, g3 played. Now the king can come to h3. This check on f4 is not dangerous. The king can come to g4. There's no time to take on g2 because of rook f8 check followed by b8 queen. Knight e6 attacking the rook on c7, rook d7, knight c5 attacking the rook once again. A rook takes d6 is the move, and after king e5, rook c6, you're attacking the knight on c5. If you take the pawn on b7, it's rook takes a6. This knight is pinned. If it goes away, even protecting the rook on b3, the pawn on g3 will drop as well. So knight d7 attacking the rook, and here after rook e8, king d5, rook takes a6. White is transforming its own advantage. Rook takes b7, and the king takes the pawn. This is a game over. You're an exchange and a pawn up, and well, it's a very easy win as you're just about to promote your g pawn, pawn to g4, king d7, rook cuts off the king, so the king can never come in front of the pawn. Knight b7, rook a7, excellent technique. King c6, g5, king b6, and now another nice transformation, just giving back the exchange, and you're getting rook endgame with an extra pawn, and this g pawn is way too strong. King c6, g7, rook goes back to b8, and after king h5, the g pawn is unstoppable. The king will come to h7, and you promote the g pawn. So here, this is the moment. Fabiano Caruana became the new champion, or better said, he retained his title because he won last year as well, and now with a round to go, he already is secure of sole victory. He is 1.5 point ahead of Lanier Dominguez and Wesley So, who only could draw their games. Well, that's big news for Fabi. He's having a great year, great successes. He qualified for the candidates. He wins the US Championships, and playing maybe not his best chess we have seen, but he very nicely showed his class in this game, outplaying the super talent Abimanyu Mishra. Hope you enjoyed this game. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and then much more to come very soon. Bye bye.